These last few months have delivered some of the biggest box office bombs of the year. Ethan Coen somehow convinced a studio to bankroll his second flop in a row. Marvel's Fantastic Four collapsed after one weekend, and somebody thought it was a good idea to spend $20 million remaking a horror movie that most people don't even remember from the 80s. That's 14 disasters in 3 months. So here's a look at summer 2025's biggest flops. Ron Howard is usually the safest pair of hands in the business, but this time, he finally missed. This is the same guy who made Apollo 13 and A Beautiful Mind. But his new one, Eden, just couldn't catch a break. $35 million spent, down from a gross budget of $55 million thanks to Australian tax breaks, star-studded cast, and it took 8 months just to get a US distributor. By the time it finally landed in theaters, the buzz had evaporated. It didn't help that the thing leaked online 2 months before the official release. Eden is a true story about a bunch of European settlers trying to build a utopia in the Galapagos after World War I. The cast is stacked here: Ana de Armas, Jude Law, Sydney Sweeney. Almost 40% of the budget went straight to above-the-line costs: actors, director, script. But reviews out of Toronto Film Festival were limp, just 57% on Rotten Tomatoes. And after all the delays, it limped into North America with just a $1.3 million opening. For Ron Howard, that's rough. The film itself is a real outlier for him, way more savage than you'd expect, like Lord of the Flies on a deserted island. But even that couldn't save it. Marvel had 3 swings at the plate this year. All 3 missed. The Fantastic Four is the one that really stings. The official budget was over $200 million, but between reshoots and marketing, insiders say it was closer to $350 million. Either way, this one needed at least $500 million just to break even. It opened okay, then cratered, an 80% drop in the second weekend, which is basically a death sentence for a supposed tentpole. Disney's investor reports already named both Cap 4 and Thunderbolts as money losers. Fantastic Four managed to do even worse. Despite a cast stacked with names, Pedro Pascal, Vanessa Kirby, Joseph Quinn, it never broke past the hardcore Marvel fans. Marvel's first real attempt at a new team post-pandemic, and the numbers just aren't there. Disney has now pushed back both Avengers movies. It's like they knew full well Fantastic Four would bomb. Nobody should be surprised. Even Kevin Feige skipped Comic-Con. There was a time when superhero movies breaking $1 billion felt normal. But now, this market can't keep supporting two $200 million movies a year that nobody but diehards are watching past opening weekend. If Doomsday can't pull it off, that's probably the final word on the whole superhero trend. Eddington never had a chance, and the release date didn't do it any favors. You've got a dark pandemic comedy set in a tiny western town, Joaquin Phoenix, Pedro Pascal, Emma Stone, and Ari Aster directing. But it's a hard sell, even with all that talent. The movie cost at least $25 million, and it made just $11 million before getting rushed to streaming. The timing was a killer. Jurassic World Rebirth started July off by hauling in $800 million, then James Gunn's Superman came out swinging with another $500 million. Then came the Fantastic Four, all within weeks of Eddington's release. There's just no way a dark, oddball western is going to survive up against 3 giant blockbusters. A24 has lost money on Aster before. Beau is Afraid was a $35 million loss, and you have to wonder how many more times they'll back him for these passion projects. At one point, Aster mentioned that a sequel to Eddington is currently in development. Good luck with that. Not even the sex scenes could save this one. Once upon a time, the Coen brothers were untouchable, and now Ethan Coen, working solo with his wife Trisha Cook, can't catch a break at the box office. Honey Don't is the second flop in a planned trilogy of lesbian-themed B-movies. The first was Drive Away Dolls, which barely made $8 million on a $15 million budget. Somehow, Ethan talked someone into giving him another $20 million for this follow-up. Aubrey Plaza, Margaret Qualley, and Chris Evans headline, but the plot, a private eye tangled up with a cult in Bakersfield, is a mess. The movie can't even crack 50% on Rotten Tomatoes, sitting at 46% and dropping, with viewers liking it even less. It's pulled in just $3 million so far. Drive Away Dolls had mixed reviews, but at least squeaked out a fresh 64%. Honey Don't is just flat. Supporting characters go nowhere, the story never really clicks, and the thing is, the Coens never made anything this muddled before. Even the critics seem to agree. Every review reads like they're waiting for Ethan to get back with his brother. Joel's busy working solo in Scotland, so who knows when or if we'll ever get a real Coen reunion. But at this rate, financing the third part of this trilogy is looking unlikely. Honey Don't just doesn't work, no matter how you slice it. And then there's Witchboard. The original 1986 horror movie cost $2 million and made $7 million. Not exactly a classic, but solid business for its time. But Hollywood, in its infinite wisdom, decided to remake it for $20 million. This time around, the remake got just $200,000. Chuck Russell directed. He also did a remake of The Blob, which is actually great, but nobody actually needed a Witchboard remake. Couple finds a cursed magical board, evil thing gets unleashed, generic bad stuff happens. People didn't show up, except apparently for a handful who gave it a shockingly high 79% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. Personally, I have no idea what they spent that $20 million on. Jamie Campbell Bower, who starred, is out here saying he'd love to do a sequel. Good for him, I guess, but with numbers like that, it's a miracle they got through post-production. Wes Anderson was cruising for a long time. His movies had style, they stuck to reasonable budgets, and they made money. But since the pandemic, it's been a different story. Not just for Anderson, but for the whole industry. Out of his last 3 movies, only one even crossed $50 million at the box office. His latest, The Phoenician Scheme, wrapped up as Anderson's lowest-grossing film in almost 20 years. Didn't even hit $40 million worldwide. Last time Anderson saw numbers that low was with The Darjeeling Limited back in 2007. A couple years ago, Anderson put out 4 short films on Netflix. One of them, The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar, won him an Oscar. But feature films have been another story lately. The Phoenician Scheme cost $30 million, about the same as The French Dispatch and Asteroid City. Of those, only Asteroid City managed to get past $50 million. The thing is, Anderson's movies are more or less passion projects these days, backed by his billionaire friend, Stephen Rails. Basically, Anderson can make whatever he wants and nobody's stopping him. The guy has a blank check for life, so even if the box office keeps shrinking, Anderson's not going anywhere. Elio was the first big bomb of the season. This was supposed to be Pixar's return to form, with a $150 million budget. But from the start, things just felt off. It opened in third place with only $21 million. International numbers were even worse. Just $14 million. That's the lowest opening ever for a Pixar film. It was clear right away. This one was going nowhere. Even Pixar staff started calling it catastrophic behind closed doors. What happened here was basically a creative tug-of-war. The movie started out under Adrian Molina, who put together an early version people inside Pixar seemed to love. But higher-ups got nervous about Elio feeling too feminine, so anything that came off as queer-coded started getting cut. One former crew member spelled it out. You remove this big key piece, which is all about identity, and Elio just becomes about totally nothing, and that's exactly what ended up on screen. This isn't some isolated case either. Plenty of folks at Pixar now talk about leadership refusing to take risks, playing it safe at every turn. Pete Docter even said in 2024 that Pixar should focus on the most relatable films possible, which for staff just meant more watering down. Or, as one artist put it, a lot of people like to blame Disney, but the call is coming from inside the house. No surprise, the end result was such a mess. Ballerina was supposed to keep the John Wick universe rolling, but it barely made it out of the gate. With a $90 million budget and only $130 million worldwide, this one isn't a total wipeout, but for a franchise spin-off, it's seriously underperforming. The drop in week 2 was brutal, 65%. Even with decent audience scores, Ballerina just didn't have that pull. Keanu Reeves wasn't front and center, and without him, the whole thing felt like an afterthought. So Ballerina ends up as the lowest-grossing Wick film. This is also just the latest in a long string of bombs for Lionsgate. Last year, they managed to rack up 7 flops in a row. No wonder Legendary Pictures is circling. After splitting the studio from Starz back in May, Lionsgate's clearly on the market, and Legendary, fresh off hits like the Dune trilogy and Minecraft, is already talking about co-productions. If that goes well, Lionsgate could easily get swallowed up entirely. There's not much mystery here about why the sequel didn't connect. The first one hit big as a January horror release. This time, they decided to swing for a summer tentpole, and it went nowhere. The sequel opened with just $17 million, way down from projections. By the end, it had only made $39 million off a $25 million budget. Not enough to break even. The main problem is, they tried to turn a horror movie into an action sequel Terminator style. The original Megan opened at over $30 million. This one couldn't even crack $10 million domestically. Oddly, the fan scores were a bit higher, but nobody showed up. Jason Blum was upfront about it. We all thought Megan was like Superman. We could do anything to her. We could change genres. We could turn her from a bad guy into a good guy. And we classically overthought how powerful people's engagement was with her. Big mistake moving it into the crowded summer schedule too, especially when it had to compete with Apple's Brad Pitt racing blockbuster, Jurassic World, and a new Superman movie all at once. This one looked like a sure thing on paper. Stephen King story, Mike Flanagan directing, Tom Hiddleston and Mark Hamill starring. Even picked up the People's Choice Award at Toronto Film Festival, which usually sets you up for a major Oscar run. Neon jumped on the rights, but then sat on the film for almost a year, completely missing the awards window. The Life of Chuck is a fantasy drama based on King's novella, with the story told in reverse, from a man's death to his childhood as the universe unravels. When it finally opened, there was barely any marketing, and it basically went unnoticed. It's not a bad film by any means. Metacritic has it at 68, and Flanagan fans really liked it. But nobody seemed interested in something so sentimental. Honestly, it's the same story A Man Called Otto ran into a couple of years back despite starring Tom Hanks. People just aren't showing up for these kinds of movies anymore. Dakota Johnson starred in 2 relationship comedies this summer. The first one, Materialist, got a huge push, made over $80 million on a $20 million budget. The second one is a whole different story. $15 million budget, a little over $100,000 back so far. That's just brutal. No world where this thing even sniffs break even if it hangs around theaters for another 2 months. The premise is actually interesting here. Guy's wife asks for a divorce, he runs off to his friends, and discovers their secret to happiness is an open marriage. Michelangelo Covino directed this one. It actually got decent reviews at Cannes. Neon picked it up and handled the release, but, well, you can see the results. Covino's saying he wants to make stuff that's timeless and wildly entertaining and artfully commercial. Maybe he nailed the first 2, but that commercial part? Not so much. But here's the thing. This isn't a bad movie. It's actually good. If you've got a chance to see it in theaters, do it, because the reviews are honestly strong. 85% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the New York Times called it the year's funniest relationship comedy. Just one of those neon indie films that never had a real shot at big money. An R-rated sex dramedy about open marriage isn't as easy to sell as the usual rom-com stuff, and that budget didn't help either. Pierce Brosnan and Samuel L. Jackson in a Western action movie. You'd think that's an easy sell, right? But almost nobody even realized the Unholy Trinity came out. Roadside Attractions quietly snuck this one into theaters, and it barely scraped $1 million at the box office. With those names, that's embarrassing. Jackson and Brosnan both do what they can, but it doesn't matter. The script is just tacky. Cringeworthy, honestly. Predictable, sappy, and somehow manages to feel like a soap opera even with all the shooting and blood. To be fair, this movie is just plain bad. The writing's generic, the plot's a mess, and critics trashed it. Rotten Tomatoes has it at 40%. The Hollywood Reporter sums it up best. Even with Brosnan and Jackson both putting in decent work, Jackson with some epic sideburns, there's only so much you can do to save a formulaic story about stolen gold, double crosses, and bad dialogue. Emma Mackey stars as Sophia, stuck caring for her mother Rose, played by Fiona Shaw. They head to a Spanish beach town hoping some shamanic doctor can cure Rose's mystery illness. Instead, Sophia starts drifting, caught up with an enigmatic traveler played by Vicky Krieps. It played at Berlin, made some awards noise there, but that's about it. At the box office, $42,000. Barely a blip. Critics didn't hold back. 37% positive, the rest called it flat, disconnected, and just plain dull. Everyone agreed, Looks good, but there's nothing to hold on to. Characters you can't care about, a story that never lands, and an atmosphere that's all style, zero impact. IndieWire said it best. There's a 60s art house movie in here somewhere, but Hot Milk instead relies on those films' most tiresome and outmoded tendencies. 42 grand at the box office kinda says it all. Usually, even tiny horror releases make enough to cover a modest budget. Not this one. Borderline pulled in just over $200,000 at the box office on a $5 million spend. The script made some noise back in December 2020. It was on the blacklist. 11 mentions, written by Jimmy Warden and picked up by Lucky Chap. It's about some lovesick sociopath who escapes from a mental institution and invades the house of a 90s pop star. Samara Weaving and Ray Nicholson are both here, and honestly, they deserved better. The performances almost save it, but the writing just isn't there. Even horror fans are calling this Samara Weaving's most forgettable role so far. Characters are thin, the story's flimsy. Borderline was released in theaters and on digital at the same time in March 2025, so people just stayed home and watched it. Makes sense. Nobody's waiting for a theatrical window on a movie like this. The box office numbers pretty much tell the whole story.